My name is Charlie Goldberg. I'm currently at Syracuse University in upstate New York, but I'm originally from Buffalo, Minnesota. I did my undergraduate work at Concordia College in Moorhead, and this fall I'll be the new professor in the history department teaching ancient history. I started my undergraduate work at the University of Minnesota, and I was, at that point, a dual poli-sci and history major. I ended up at Concordia College transferring after my sophomore year, at which point I kind of settled on history as my only major. And I was really interested in a lot of different aspects of history, not the ancient past, mainly modern Europe, European history. And that all changed, really. I had a study abroad trip it was a semester-long trip to Greece and to Turkey, and along the way, being immersed in the ancient past on a personal level, so not just reading texts and actually being there, it really opened my eyes to a piece of the past that I, at that point, didn't have much exposure to. In particular, one of the requirements for that trip abroad was to lead a site visit of an important ancient landmark, and the one that I chose was the Theater of Dionysus in Athens. And being surrounded by the rows of seats, of marble seats, and seeing where drama was really forged for the first time in Western history, at least, was a really deeply moving experience for me. And then I got to teach my classmates about that. And that was my first real experience, really great experience with teaching. So that whole semester-long trip was really pivotal for me in a lot of different ways. And I know that study abroad is really important at Bethel. And so I hope students out there will see my experience and use it to encourage them. Go out, take a J-term trip, take a semester-long trip. This is the only time you'll have in your adult life when this is possible, and so take advantage of it. I got married soon after college, and I knew pretty soon after that I did want to go to graduate school in ancient history, but I knew I didn't want to do it right away. I needed a break from academic life after 4 years of undergraduate work, and I wanted to have some real-world life experience under my belt. So my wife and I knew that we would take at least a year off. It ended up being 3 years total for me. But as it happened, I needed a job, and I found a job in my hometown in Buffalo at a software startup, not knowing much about technology, about software before that time. But it was an eye-opening experience in kind of forced learning because that's what the paycheck asked me to do. And I enjoyed it. We eventually moved on. My wife started her master's degree in North Carolina, so I had to leave that position. And while we were there, I firmly settled on going to graduate school and getting my PhD in history. And I'm kind of at the culmination of that path right now. I'm finishing up my dissertation. Primarily, I study politics and culture in ancient Rome during the period when Rome was expanding throughout the Mediterranean. So they're kind of their grand imperial project, which goes from about 400 or 300 BCE until around 1 or 200 AD. So within that's a really broad range of time, and politics and culture are a very broad category to study. My dissertation has been on the way the Romans thought about ancient manhood and the connections between that and political life and public life. So I'm asking, as a broad question, what did it mean to be a good man in ancient Rome? And the answer that I come to in my dissertation is that it really meant public service, primarily in politics, because the Romans were a very deeply political people, and a commitment to the public good. Through studying the past, we uncover deep questions about life in general that these ancient and past peoples were already asking. Similar questions to things that are important to us today. So I especially like that aspect about the Roman past because the American Constitution is in many ways based on the Republican project in ancient Rome. We have a Senate for a reason because the Founding Fathers decided that the Roman Senate was a good model. And you go all over Washington, D.C., you see replicas of Roman temples. And that's because in our own political history, we considered that we thought that the Romans were asking the right questions about what does it mean to forge a political community. So in all my teaching and in my work, I try to bring the relevance of that into modern times and to convince students that this isn't just a mental exercise, and I'm not asking you to memorize dates and events, but I want you to ask how this applies to my life. Some students aren't immediately familiar with what the digital humanities are and how it applies to them, especially in history, but in all throughout the humanities. It allows students to stop being only consumers of history, consumers of English literature, and it allows them to now produce their own ideas and bring their own insights and ideas to a wider audience. Because traditionally, to produce something in these academic disciplines requires a PhD and it requires a publisher or a journal article that is very difficult to produce that. But in the digital age, there are a myriad of different avenues that you can bring your ideas to a much larger audience. Podcasts, iPhone apps, creating websites, online exhibits. And those are things that undergraduate students can already do oftentimes with the training that they already bring to the table. So it really expands what scholarship means, and it opens it up and encourages students to participate in that project. It has allowed me to do so much more in my own scholarship than I could ever have hoped to do. My department at Syracuse, it's not a large classics program, and so the library has some limited resources. Sources might be difficult to access in the traditional way. If I don't have access to papyri or the ancient texts, it's hard to do my work. In ancient history, since the beginning of kind of computerization or digitization, everything I need is a mouse click away. So I could not write my dissertation without technical tools that bring the ancient sources directly to my face. I could do that right here as we speak. So that just changed the way we as historians work, especially in ancient history. I think that we always have to strive to remember that as historians, we're meant to draw human connections and parallels from one era or one society to another. And I don't think that will change in the digital age. I think that will always remain our focus. For example, the Greek historian Herodotus is the father of history. That's one of his nicknames. And he's the first person to write historia, which is a Greek word that just means inquiry. And he did that with digital tools. At his time, that meant a stylus and a papyrus. So he's a digital humanist in a way because that technology allowed him to share his work with a much broader section of his population and his society. That's what digital humanities is rooted in. It's sharing knowledge, and it's telling important stories and drawing important lessons and bringing that to a wider public.